because it might be in their email, because I'm not calling them by their last name, especially if it's a really complicated one. And I might know whereabouts they live, but I don't necessarily have the address. So where do you get that information?
Driver's license.
Driver's license, or from the pre-approval. That's a lot of times where I get it from, because Robin already got it, or the loan officer already got it, so now I know if there's a middle initial I should be using and what their address is. But you absolutely could get it from the driver's license. Or you could also call when you're talking to your clients about writing an offer, just ask them, do they want to use a middle initial? And if you say, how do you spell your last name, and all of a sudden they say Smith, you're going to be like, you know? Is that with an S or? So you also need to have the MLS sheet out, because you need to use some of the items you're going to find in the MLS sheet to prepare the contract. So you need the tax ID number. You need to know the seller's name. You need to try to get an idea of what's included if you have already done that. Of course, you need to know how much they want to offer, because your pre-approval should be reflective of what their offer is. You should never send a pre-approval for someone that's $160,000 when they're offering $150,000. It should always be for what the offer is. Do they need closing assistance? Do you need to write that into the contract? And how much do they need? Again, part of your pre-approval. So you need to be communicating with the loan officer. You're not just sending your buyers to the loan officer and then saying, well, what did your loan officer say? You call the loan officer. And you find out, and you tell them this is what they want to offer. They're telling me they need $5,000 of closing assistance. Is that enough? Have you verified they have the funds for the rest of it? Are they using a housing authority loan to get the rest of it? Where is it coming from? Of course, what type of financing is it? So you need the pre-approval to match the offer amount. So pre-approval is really one of those key parts to even being able to prepare an offer, because it answers a lot of those questions. And your communication with the loan officer will answer those questions. Escrow amount. How much do they want to put down as an escrow? How much do they have to put down as escrow? I always tell people that $1,000 is typical for our area. The more the house, the higher the escrow deposit. Some people will try to get away with $500, but $500, it can work. But as a listing agent, you really should be pushing for that $1,000, because $500 is a lot easier to walk away from than $1,000. So, when do they want to settle? This brings up the question of, are you in a lease? When does your lease end? Oh, it doesn't end until December. Have you talked to your landlord? Oh, they told me in the beginning they were going to let us out. You should probably talk to them again. Just had some clients had that. They said we talked about that. We made sure they knew we wanted to buy a house, and they said that wouldn't be a problem. We just need to give them 6 days notice. I said, okay. I said, well, I would still go talk to the housing office, because they're in Eagle Meadows over here, the old base housing. And sure enough, they're not letting them out. And they were arguing with the guy, well, this is what you said. Well, that's not what the lease says. This is what you said. Well, I didn't tell you that. And so now they have to, they found that out before we wrote the offer, but ultimately they wanted to move forward anyways, because they're being charged $2,000 which I don't know how to get that amount, so I'm doing some counseling with them on that anyways. But you need to make sure you ask that question, because the first time you have a deal fall through because they can't get out of their lease, that is not a contractual reason to get out of their contract. So they will be losing their deposit if they just decide they can't do it. So make sure you ask that question. And what inspections are necessary or desired? So is, are necessary or desired. So is it well, septic? Does it have a basement? Does it have a conditioned crawl space? Even if it's not a crawl space, you may want to rate on if it's a conditioned crawl space, because it's all sealed up and allowing the air into the house. And you make sure you talk to your buyers about the cost of those inspections. You also, of course, need to have the seller's disclosure ready before you can prepare the contract, because you need to know what is included. You also need to review it. Don't just let your buyers review it. You need to review it, because you need to make sure that you notice whether or not there's anything in there that they are disclosing that's not working, because it has to be requested for repair in the initial offer. And then, obviously, you have the guide for what's working and not working. And then, of course, you need to think, is Decoya apply? Is it a condo? Is it over $500 homeowners association? Is it an REO? Are there going to be bank addendums? Because you need to write, if you don't have them in the beginning, but you know they're coming, you need to have in there that on the, here, let me get this all you guys and I can show you. On the page where you're listing what's attached to the contract, you can need to add that yes, there are additional addenda or bank addenda.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Quick. RK came about this yesterday, and you may have already answered it for him, but I had the question as well. He was dealing with a bank-owned property, and they didn't have any disclosures, and they weren't going to give him any disclosures. Is
Right.
that?
Banks will not give disclosures. They are supposed to, by law, give disclosures. They will not give disclosures. If you make them, if an agent tries to force the banks, if a listing agent tries to force the banks to do a disclosure, all they will do is cross it out and just do a sign and just cross it out and cross it out. They won't disclose anything.
Is that better to have that than nothing then? Like, to have them say, we know nothing?
It is their default, not your buyer's.
Okay.
So I am aware that there was one case up in Wilmington a couple years back where the banks won't do disclosures, and the buyers bought the house. They ended up having this really bad mold issue, and they were able to prove that the bank was aware of it. And then they sued and they won. First of all, if you're going to go take a lawsuit against a bank, you better have a really good attorney and have plenty of money.
Yeah, and time.
And time. Second of all, that's the difficult part. You have to prove that they were aware of it. And I'll tell you right now, there's plenty of times I can prove that a listing agent, this is my bigger problem with it, the listing agents are aware of it and they are not disclosing it. Because they have an obligation to disclose listing defects. And they should be taken to the commission for it because there are several of them that do not disclose. There are one or two that I think do for the most part.
So as a listing agent, like if you got a call from a bank and they wanted to list the property, you go to the property to inspect it and see what it's worth, there's mold on the wall, you now are responsible for disclosure?
Yeah, you remember in real estate class?
Kind of, but that's
Realtors
why
are
I'm asking.
responsible for disclosing known latent defects. If it is visible and clear, and you are aware of it, you have to disclose it. I had a listing in the Orchards about 6 or 7 years ago where it was we had a really, really wet winter and a really, really wet spring. Basement, the house was 10 years old, never had a drop of water in the crock, let alone, in the basement. Water table rose and all of a sudden we had 4 inches of water in the basement because they never put a sump pump in because they never had a drop of water in the crock before. So that is an adventure in of itself, but we'll just leave it at that. So I kept telling the sellers I needed that to be added to the disclosure. I sent them the seller's reaffirmation multiple times so that we could attach that to disclosure, and they just kept not getting it. They just didn't. They were up in Pennsylvania and they just didn't
do it.
So after a couple weeks, I took the liberty to go ahead and write on the disclosure myself. Agent is aware of this, and explain it was taken care of, because I didn't want to be in a position where
An offer came in and you had to
and you have to disclose it. So so that's the bank owns. No, they do not provide disclosures. Some of them will provide, like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they'll provide a lead-based pay disclosure because it's federal law and they're federal. So, yeah, I know, right?
feel good.
But it just says they don't know anything.
Okay.
And that's what all their addendums, that's basically what their addendums say is, we don't know anything, we don't know anything, we don't know anything, you can't sue us, you can't sue us, you can't sue us, you can't sue us.
I'm more comfortable with that though than I am with nothing. With my buyer.
So buyers beware, get there and make sure they get inspections done, period. Yeah, we need to, there's a whole, already had a short sale class we could have on those aspects. If you're anyone that's interested in that, make sure you come to me. And we'll talk about it, because it's never the same. But there are some beware things. So the packet that I just gave you guys, I want you to hold on to this packet and save this packet. And you as well, Brandy. So Audrey and I sat down and we reviewed. Yeah, we reviewed this and make sure that we're all on the same page. So this is what your offers should look like when you send it to somebody else. When you're sending an offer to a listing agent, every offer should be in this order like this. So you have your realtor's data sheet, you have your pre-approval letter.
Oh, you put your data sheet, you submit that with the offer?
To the listing agent, yes.
Got
Especially as we turn into a seller's market, and here's why.
Okay.
As we turn into a seller's market, And first of all, I have 4 or 5 offers on the same property because it's awesome. That really helps me as a listing agent, for one, and I appreciate that I have this cover sheet so I know what, the specs of the offer are. 2, but most importantly, if I have 2 offers that are pretty much the same exact thing, and I know that this buyer is going to use, let's just say Gary Dodge, and I know that this buyer is going to use Mike Fisher. I know that Gary Dodge, he's a great attorney, and I definitely like him to represent my buyers, even though I don't always use him that much. He will find a problem where there isn't a problem, if he can find a problem, because he likes to fix things, and he likes to make them all a big deal. But this other buyer is working with Mike Fisher. This other buyer is working with Mike Fisher, because they've already talked about who they're going to use as attorney when they talk to their buyers and do an offer. I am way more inclined to advise my seller that this closing attorney is more likely going to be easier to work with than this closing attorney. Say we have a fence that's over the line.
Okay.
Gary Dodge will tell that buyer that's buying the house that they better get that fence moved instead of trying to do a boundary line agreement.
Right.
I have a friend I just talked to on Friday that used him, and it was like a 3-foot issue.
Right. So he has his ways about things. So for my seller's best interest, I'm going to want to know who the attorney is. So as we turn into a seller's market, there's going to be some varying things that happens. You're going to have listing agents call you on your offers and ask you questions like, what attorney are they going to use? Because that's important through the transaction. What home inspection company are they going to use? Because if I find out I've got one that's going to be through Amerispec and I've got one that's going to be through that nightmare guy, I can't remember his name, we saw him 3 times last year. He was just awful. Thankfully I haven't seen him again. Or even Reliable, I'm not a big fan of Reliable. But that's also going to affect how I advise my seller. So the data sheets give a picture of how the transaction is going to go. A lot of people got away from using them in the last 6 or 7 years, who always used them before, because those things weren't, they're just happy to have a buyer. I don't care what attorney you're using, I don't care what home is, just please sell a house. But as we turn into more of a seller's market, this becomes way more important.
Okay.
So all data sheet, your pre-approval, your escrow check, and these contracts I filled out with Captain America and Wonder Woman. I want you guys to keep these as well, because this is a base guide for what your contract should look like. So there are no blanks. It's NA, yes or no. If it doesn't apply, you want to.
Is this commitment date, is this a 3-week out?
Yeah, I just based on today, so it's a month out.
Oh, gotcha.
So, but closing's 2 months out.
Okay.
So, as far as as far as like a specific date like that, or your closing date, obviously you're going to gauge that based on when you're trying to close. So if you're trying to close quickly, you need to have a sooner commitment. If you're closing 60 days, give them a month for commitment, that's fine, nobody's in a hurry. If your buyers have a very difficult time getting their schedules together at the same time, if they work opposite hours on their jobs, you may want to give them 7 days or 10 days to apply for the loan versus 5 days. So there's some variances, but for your standard typical transaction, that's nothing crazy. This was kind of what it should look like.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So we've got 2 months out for closing. I was like in my head 45 days. You get what I'm saying?
I do. If you're at 45 days closing, then you want to do 3 weeks for your loan commitment. Or you want to do your home inspections within 15 days. 45 days is reasonable for closing, but 60 days is best.
Well, yeah, it makes me not crazy.
Right, it makes everybody not go crazy.
Right.
So you could use, ultimately it's up to the buyer and seller.
Take them out back.
Does the listing agent, you as the listing agent say, oh, 2 months out, let's go with the one that's only closing in 45 days?
Not necessarily, no. It depends on what's best for my seller.
Okay.
for one. Are they already moved out? 45 days is more attractive.
Right.
If they need time to move, 60 days is good too. So, yeah, every situation is different, so. And then, I always put, and I think, you know, everyone's on the same page, if we put within 20 days of a ratified contract for inspections. When you have a banco and you wanna make it 10 days, because they're all gonna say 10 days anyways, the bank addendums are gonna supersede everything in here. The reason you wanna give yourself 20 days from a ratified contract is because it could take, you can get a contract ratified in 2 days, you can take 2 weeks to get a contract ratified. So if you put an actual date in there, and you were so busy negotiating the terms of the purchase price and the terms of settlement and closing costs, and all of a sudden 2 weeks goes by, everybody signed off, and all of a sudden you go to do inspections, like, oh crap, I have 2 days. So you really want to use from a ratified contract versus a date. Now you will have some brokers out there who disagree with that. I don't care. I'll have a
I used
conversation
the
with
date
them
in
if
the
I have.
last one.
You really should use the within 20 days, and that's just it. You don't know how long it's going to take to ratify a contract. Tom Burns does not agree with this. Tom Burns is on the Forms Committee, helped write this. I don't care if he's on the Forms Committee. I understand what his intent is, but they understand that this is the world we live in. So.
I think in zip forms, when I clicked on it, it wanted to give me a date now.
It does. In zip forms, they are date fields. You have to hit the space bar to type into it.
Gotcha.
As is.
I think that's why I did it,
It's not
a
even-
date. I just, by default.
Yeah, it does. It's a date. It's a date field. You just you hit the space bar to write it.
Gotcha.
What were you gonna say?
I always struggle with the as-is homes. Is it necessary? I've given,
To do inspections, or
I get so much different information, yeah, for inspection. If it's a home as
you
is,
still want to know what you're buying?
no, definitely still have an inspection.
Okay.
But really, is there a need to put anything here?
Yes.
So, I mean, like days?
Yeah.
Because if they don't like it, they still don't get their money back. No one's
Yes.
fixing anything.
Well, that's BS, because that's still, if someone's putting as is in the contract, if you can say the buyer inspections are for informational
Mhm.
purposes, but the inspection contingencies still apply.
Okay.
You've checked, yes, they're doing inspections. So they still have 20 days to back out if they find
Money back.
defects that they don't accept and give their money back.
And for bank loans and short sales, you recommend 10 days? Is that what you said?
For the
bank
inspections.
loans,
Okay.
10 days. For short sales, you want to do 20 days from short sale approval, or SS approval, because short sale approval doesn't fit.
Okay.
So 20 days from SS approval. You don't want to spend any of the buyer's money until you have that short sale approval.
And they come back and there's stuff that needs to be fixed, and they're like, well, we don't want this house. That's a reason for mutual release because we've marked it as a contingency.
Yes.
Simone.
So you have your contract and some of the things, like just point out some basics there. Let's see. 22, other inspections, your septic system. So one thing I just want to point out, you always want to have that the seller is going to provide the septic inspection report within a certain period of time. And Randy, this is different, not what you guys have been doing, but this is what you will be doing moving forward.
Okay.
Okay? You always are going to ask the seller to do the septic inspection. You are also always going to give your buyer the opportunity to have one done as well. So on page 6, I have within, seller's going to give it within 15 days of a ratified contract, but I have buyers going to have within 15 days of receipt of seller's report to have their own inspection done. Because the seller's report is good for 3 years. So if the seller provides us a report that's 2 years old, then my buyer, I'm going to advise that they have their own inspection report done, because God knows what happens to a septic in 2 years.
Might be
You could end up with
closing
closing.
Okay, seller's disclosure is only good for 3 years?
God.
The septic inspection
Oh,
that the seller provides can be up to 3 years old. So if they just bought the house 2 years ago, had a septic inspection, they could provide that, and that satisfies their requirement for the contract. If they live there for 2 years and pour grease and paint, whatever else down, you might have an issue. So, your buyers you always want to have your buyers have the option as well. So those both should be filled out. Just because you're asking for it from the seller does not mean you put no for the buyer.
And it doesn't mean
So
that
we're at-
if just because you ask, you have the right to as a buyer doesn't mean you do.
Have to,
Right.
correct.
It
So
just means you have the right to.
if you have not talked to your buyer about radon yet, put yes, they're gonna have the radon inspection. And then you just let them know, if you decide not to have the inspection, that's fine. You're waiving it by not doing it and by not asking for anything within 20 days. You're waiving that opportunity. So you don't have to, but at least now you have the option to. Make sense?
Now, one question.
Mm-hmm.
You say within 15 days of receipt of selling report.
Yes.
What is that saying? What is that stating again?
It's saying that the seller, the 20